I'm Lori Grant, Managing Editor of Transport Topics. Welcome to our Live on Web edition. We're going to recap the year for you today and attempt to peer into the future. A great deal happened on the regulatory front and in business to impact trucking this year, and the same is anticipated for 2016. To put those attention-grabbing issues in perspective, we have once again called on Transport Topics reporters. Rip Watson is here. He covers business, and Eugene Mulero, who covers congressional and governmental affairs. And also joining us is Sean McNally, spokesman for American Trucking Associations. He'll give us a hand with initiatives the Federation has had this year and shed light on some of what's to come. We welcome your interaction as well. Email your questions and comments to share@ttnews.com, or you can comment directly on this article page. Our sponsor for today's program is Select Trucks. Welcome. Eugene, we'll get to the agreement on legislative packaging and extending tax breaks at the government in a bit, but I want to start with that much anticipated piece of legislation signed into law earlier this month, Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or FAST. Tell us about the key provisions in that legislation for trucking.
Yeah, and really the FAST Act was the most significant transportation issue to come out of Capitol Hill this year, and it was a 5-year, $305 billion highway law that for trucking, it removes from public view the compliance, safety, accountability scores, and these were the scores that the trucking industry had long criticized. And it also sets in motion reforms to that CSA program. Additionally, it approves hair testing as an alternative to urine tests for pre-employment screening. Those are two key provisions for trucking. And additionally, for the entire agency, FMCSA, it sets myriad reforms to grant systems and grant allocations.
Okay. Sean, anything else that the Federation expected out of FAST that happened or didn't happen?
I don't know if expected, but I think we were a little, while we're certainly appreciative that we came to a long-term funding solution, or at least a funding solution for the next 5 years, we didn't get to a long-term sustainable solution in terms of either a gas tax or some other long-term mechanism to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent. Governor Graves has said that essentially these funding, the funding mechanisms and pay-fors were rummaging through the couch cushions. So, we would have liked to see more done on that front. We're happy it held the line on tolling, limiting the interstate tolling conversion projects to 3 states and putting some extra restrictions on states that get those pilot slots. And one other sort of provision of note is on younger drivers. Both the House and Senate had envisioned pilot programs that would have allowed drivers under the age of 21 to get commercial driver's licenses and operate across state lines. Currently, all 48 contiguous states allow drivers under 21 to drive intra. This would have allowed limited inter as part of some interstate compacts with restrictions. We viewed it as the beginning of a graduated licensing system to bring younger drivers into the industry, and with graduated permissions, they'll gradually get more responsibility and ability to drive. That was replaced in the final bill with a pilot program for young veterans, veterans or reservists under the age of 21, which is a much smaller population than I think we were hoping for, but it does require this Secretary of Transportation and DOT to examine the safety records of younger drivers in trust-state. So we're hopeful that will provide the data, safety data, to move forward on a larger pilot program in the future.
Okay, possibly, not possibly, but I guess it will expand the driver pool there. Rip, what about on the business front? Fleets, anything in FAST for fleets?
Well, definitely I'm positive that every single fleet out there is going to welcome roads that are in better condition, bridges that are in better condition.
Sure.
That's obvious. The bigger and more interesting fact to me is that we need to remember that CSA, just because it's gone away, doesn't mean that the issues that it raised are going to go away overnight. Think about it. CSA was a safety benchmark. Even though people didn't like it very much and they said it was very inaccurate, it was used extensively in the courts, which opened up liability for fleets, for brokers, and for shippers, as those scores were used basically against them, but occasionally, for to favor a particular carrier. So bottom line here is that,
They're just not public. They're not in, it's not as if they don't exist.
well, no, that's true. And frankly, the plaintiff's bar has shown over and over that they're very imaginative and creative. I could see a situation where fleets will now have to defend themselves against the fact that their scores were bad in the past. They're going to have to say, oh, well, we made this better somehow, without actually being able to show the data to prove it.
And I think that's why there was a concern on Capitol Hill by, key senators and the trucking panels and members of the House that they heard the concerns from industry, and that's why they pushed to see reforms enacted to the CSA program, and those reforms are expected to take several months of review and a review process to ultimately have a new program in place for the industry.
Had to start somewhere, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Eugene, let's get back to what's unfolding on Capitol Hill, where there are tax and spending bills that need to get through Congress. Where do those stand? What do we know so far? We realize a lot of it is still happening. Some votes won't occur until tomorrow even.
Yeah.
But what do we know so far?
So late into the night and into early this morning, we saw congressional leaders on the Hill agree to a comprehensive tax package, which is expected to reach the floors for a vote before the end of this week. And also what everybody's talking about is the fiscal 2016 massive funding bill, which is called an Omnibus. And in this Omnibus is relevant for transportation because not only would it ensure transportation funding for the Department of Transportation and its agencies through the end of September, but also there were some key provisions that the trucking industry was pushing for, one of which did not make the omnibus, and that was to authorize the use of twin 33-foot trailers nationwide. There was some strong opposition by a small group of senators led by a Mississippi Republican, Roger Wicker, that really did not support authorizing the twin 33s. That and some outcry from outside groups is what I believe ultimately led for this provision not to make it in this omnibus. Another key provision in this omnibus is that it enhances a study on an hours of service restart rule, and this restart rule is currently suspended, and the new language on the study will most likely extend the suspension for several more months, even longer. And a vote on the omnibus will very likely happen at the end of this week.
Okay. Sean, any?
I mean,
especially this issue of twins and
sure.
things like
Well, we'll start with hours of service because
Yeah.
that's this is a good day for trucking and it's a good day for highway safety. The hours of service restart restrictions, which were imposed in 2013, we said at the time, we said beforehand, we said after, and then we subsequently saw ATRI data that bore this out. We said that the restrictions, the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m.s would lead to an increase in daytime driving, daytime being the riskiest time of day to be on the road statistically, and that was borne out. And what this more robust study is going to do is it raises the bar for FMCSA. They now have to show their work, what they should have done ahead of time. So this is going to be a long-term suspension of these restrictions. This is a good thing for highway safety. It's a good thing for trucking. On 33s, we're obviously a little disappointed that Congress was cowed, ultimately cowed at the end by fear mongering, by not looking at the statistical
Why do you say
records.
that?
If you look at where these combinations and larger combinations are allowed, whether it's Florida and North Dakota, which extensively use 33s, or the 19 other states that have various combinations that are larger than the ones we're talking about, their safety record is excellent. Relative to your standard truck. This is an opportunity lost, really, for safety. It would have eliminated the need for about 6.6 million truck trips. That truck trips not taken or crash opportunities not had would have reduced crashes by more than 900.
Fewer vehicles, just by fewer vehicles being on the road.
Yes, by fewer vehicles on the road. It would have. There are tremendous upsides to this with no significant downside. So it's a lost opportunity. ATA believes that there needs to be some sort of productivity enhancement. There hasn't been one since 1981. Many of the segment of trucking that would be most affected by this cubes out often before it weighs out, meaning that they don't reach the federal weight limits, but they could carry more cargo if they had a modest increase in trailer length. So we're obviously disappointed, but we believe that ultimately that this will continue to be a discussion had in trucking and in the halls of Congress.
Well, is it dead, or can it come up again, or does that require? Is that, in essence, an election question? You need a whole new Congress to try to get something like that through.
We'll have to see. I mean, ATA will continue to look for opportunities to advance a pro-safety, pro-efficiency, pro-trucking agenda. So, next year is a new year, and we'll have to see what happens.
And it's very interesting, still on the 33s, that from a legislative perspective, for the provision not to make the Omnibus, because it got bipartisan support in the House by funding leaders there, and also in the Senate. There was a key support from senior members in the appropriations committees and in leadership. You had the chairman of committees backing this provision. So it speaks to this strong but small opposition, led by the senator from Mississippi. He has some bipartisan support on that. But again, it's just, I'm surprised that small influence ultimately, won over and it resulted in not having the 33s in the Omnibus.
Well, let's be a little clear here, though. The 33s, while they were offering 18% more productivity, which is why package carriers and some less than truckload carriers loved the idea, let's be clear that there are a lot of trucking companies that did not like this. The Truckload Carriers Association, another large group, spoke out very much against it. They did not like the equipment expense that would happen. I'm not suggesting that anybody's right or wrong here. I'm just saying that this was not, a handful of people who were fear-mongering.
Yeah, no, and there were other groups, outside transportation groups, that were very animated and persistent in calling on members of Congress to oppose authorizing the Twin 33s. It wasn't just from industry; there was from some outside transportation groups as well.
Okay. Well, our lawmakers weren't the only ones on a roll. Seems like regulators were as well. And just last week, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration rolled out its final rule on using electronic logging devices. Eugene, what does this rule mandate, and how is the industry obligated to use it? It's been, long awaited, so it's happened now. Tell us a little bit more about it. What does it mandate? How does the industry have to use it now?
This is the long-awaited electronic logging device rule that the final rule was announced last week, and it required truckers to shift from paper logs to electronic logs to maintain their hours of service records. It also sets technology requirements for these e-logs, as they're known. And based on my reporting, about 3 million truckers will be impacted on this. This was the industry has been calling for this for many years, and there's support not only from key transportation groups, but also technology firms for this.
All right, Sean, you mentioned safety and efficiency and the things you ticked off a minute ago about the industry. Tell me how tell me how the industry sees ELDs,
Well,
especially when it comes to putting hours of service into perspective.
ATA is thrilled. The announcement last week was historic. This is another good day for trucking. Yes, yeah. Lots of history this year. I think electronic logs have been something ATA has advocated for many years now. We're happy to see it finally get across the goal line. Government doesn't always respond as quickly for things, but we're happy that they did here. It's going to improve compliance. We had been operating a 20th, 21st century industry using 17th century technology of pencil and paper. Moving that forward can only be a positive in terms of saving drivers time in filling out logs, doing calculations, all those sorts of things.
So more efficiency.
More efficiency there, and safety. We have there's a strong connection between compliance with the hours of service rules and highway safety, and there's also a strong connection between use of electronic logs and compliance with hours of service. So you can build that chain from an electronic logging device to improvements in highway safety. So we're looking forward to full implementation in 2 years. We know there are many carriers, many ATA members that have adopted these devices or similar devices already. They'll have an additional 2 years to make sure that their technology is up to spec, whether it's a software update or whatever. That grandfather period was important to many of our members who already made the investment.
Meaning the grandfather period, all of 2016.
Well, they'll have 2 years beyond the compliance date. So compliance date is December of 2017, so they'll have till 2019 to, if they need a software update or whatever. But that grandfather period was important to our members and important to carriers who've already made the investment in these devices.
All right. Rip, are businesses interpreting it the same way? There was some grumbling about productivity in HOS at some point. Do businesses see this as a good thing?
I think you could probably say that businesses in general think it's a good thing. Drivers who are part of a small fleet or drivers who are truly independent are still going to want miles. You will hear fleets of all sizes say that what their drivers want is miles, and because miles mean money for truckload drivers. Sure. So bottom line, there are going to continue to be people who are going to want, up until the last minute, to run those extra miles just on the theory that they need it in order to pay for the family homestead and all those other good things.
Okay. We had a lot of questions about this, lots and lots of interest on ELDs, and Paul Will, the CEO of Celadon Group, got to us, and he wanted to know, how quickly do you think ELDs will impact capacity? Rip, you want to take a shot at that?
I'd be happy to. One of the things I think we need to remember is that trucking technology over time doesn't get instantly adopted, so I think you would have to presume that this is going to be a gradual process and may last for several years. However, we need to remember also that capacity is driven by a variety of factors beyond whether there's a logging device in a truck. For example, if there is any change in hours of service when all of the studies are over, at the same time that there's a pressure on capacity because logging devices are going to put cheating drivers out of business or forcing them into compliance, we're certainly looking at something that over the long term is going to be a big issue.
Okay. Here's another one, Eugene. Andrew Malashevsky, CEO of Malashevsky Consulting, says, what are the chances that the ELD rule and HOS will be stalled in courts? And we're kind of seeing some of that now with OIDA, aren't we?
Yeah. No, just to take a step back, it's not uncommon for groups to not everybody to be in support of a rule, that's obvious, and for opponents of a rule to file suits, not only in transportation but writ large in the federal government. And recently, I believe this week, OIDA filed a suit on the agency over ELDs. That could have an effect. However, we could see other opposition come forward, but the momentum is there on the rule, and on hours of service. With what's going on in the Omnibus to extend the HOS, the study on the hours of service rule, it's likely that the opponents of that may hold off and see where we are on the study of that before taking their next steps on the issue.
Okay.
And just to tack on regarding ELD litigation, part of the delay in getting this final rule out last week was a lawsuit by, again, OIDA, mainly on the grounds that they believe these devices could be used to coerce or harass drivers. Before this rule came out, FMCSA addressed those concerns with a separate rulemaking on driver coercion. So we're hopeful that this rule will any lawsuit against it will fail, and that this rule will go into effect as scheduled.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of momentum and support industry-wide, so people have to take that into account.
All right, and we'll take one more. Rip, this is for you as well. Gerald Richards, CFO at Classic Carriers, Inc., he asks, will the announcement of the ELD rule have any impact on shippers' perception of capacity constraints? And will it have an impact on freight rates in the near term?
Oh, definitely, and here's why. When you think about it, shippers aren't paying for freight, all the freight that moves, 20 minutes before or after the freight moves. Most of the business that's moved in this country by truck is under contract. So what the shipper's perception of how much compliance there's going to be is going to be a factor in terms of the amount of capacity that they think there is going to be. And there's no question that there's a close tie between rates and capacity. All you need to do is look at last year when freight capacity was very tight and rates rose for truckload 6 or 7% pretty steadily during the year.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I think there's not hesitation on my face. That it is. I was trying. You said that when capacity is tight, with ELDs, and this you mentioned earlier about miles and time on the road. These two, how do I say this? They react to each other?
Sure. I mean, it's going to happen. That might have been what Paul's question was at. Was getting at. We've got an issue that ELDs could reduce capacity because they are not universal now, and the fact that those who don't have them are probably running much longer and more miles, and therefore when they go away, we're going to be in a situation where the number of drivers won't change, but the miles that were run before aren't going to change either, and the result is that there's going to be capacity.
I see.
tighter.
So we're looking really at a level playing field come 2017, 2019.
That's certainly what the proponents liked.
All right. This is Live on Web edition of Transport Topics. I'm managing editor Lori Grant, and with me are business reporter Rip Watson, that's who was just speaking, congressional reporter Eugene Mulero, and ATA spokesman Sean McNally. You too can join the conversation. Email your questions or comments to share@ttnews.com or comment directly on this article page. All right, I want to switch to the economy for a little bit. I mean, I know it's a big thing, but we got a lot of ground to cover here. So Housing, autos, the consumer section, they all had some strength over this year, but lagging were manufacturing, energy, exploration, fuel prices. Rip, how's trucking fared among all of these ups and downs?
I think you would say that tonnage has been moving up and down in opposite directions for almost all of the year, from month to month. What's sometimes lost is the fact that the latest statistics that we have from the American Trucking Associations is that tonnage is almost at record levels. This is quite an achievement for two reasons. One, it is the fact that tonnage, up until the energy exploration boom slowed down or ended, tonnage was being propped up and helped by the fact that fleets, flatbed fleets and tank fleets, were moving a lot of sand and pipe to energy exploration. And it's, people
Fracking
don't
sites, things
fracking.
like that.
And in fact, the rig count for fracking, I just looked at this yesterday, the active rig count of exploration is down 60% from this time last year. So that tells you that though tank carriers and flatbed guys have had to find a different way to make their money or move into a different segment of the business, like housing, which has done reasonably well this year. Overall, though, trucking moves the economy, as many people have said, and the consumer is the biggest portion of the U.S. economy. So that's been a positive, and those companies that are big in consumer have certainly signaled that.
Okay. Sean, anything else at the end that the Federation is?
I mean, I think Rip covered quite a bit of it. You know, we can say that the last tonnage report for 2015 will be out next Tuesday, so tune in for that. But you know, as Rip said, consumer purchasing has been good. That helps with tonnage, particularly around this time of year. You know, trucks deliver quite a lot of consumer goods that wind up under trees later on in the month. Fuel prices, plummeting, as TT has reported week after week, is not only a net positive for the industry; it's a positive for consumers.
We're actually going to get to that because it was a big story this year. The average price for diesel is ending the year under $2.40 a gallon, which is more than 70 cents from where it started at the top of the year. So it's been, as you said, plummeting. What's been the impact to fleets? I would imagine it's been sweet.
Oh, it's good. It's a good time to be a trucker, is the way that someone from CR England put it earlier this year. And the bottom line here is, think about this, and this is not hypothetical.
Okay.
Fleet averages 7 miles a gallon for their trucks. Right. They're going to run 8,400 miles in a month, perhaps. That's about 100,000 a year. So all of us, that's 12,000 gallons they're going to have to burn. Now, if you look at this, the 70-cent reduction, all of a sudden, that's $8,000 in their pocket. And I can't overemphasize the importance of that. Consider, by comparison, in a couple of hours, we're going to hear what the Federal Reserve does with interest rates. Right. Suppose they raise rates 1 percentage point. That's if you're buying an asset for over 5 years for $115,000, you're talking about paying about $60 more per month. So if you're a trucker, what's of more immediate value to you? That money that you're saving at the fuel pump, or the $50 the far smaller $50 are going to pay the banker?
Clearly at the fuel pump.
To add on to that and to contextualize it, because I was talking with Bob earlier this week.
Bob
Costello, ATA chief economist. You look at a penny change in fuel prices. If you annualize that, penny up or down to the industry is $388 million in total. So and that's if you annualize that. Bob does math. I don't do math. So it's not insignificant at all.
Yeah, I'll do the math for you. That might be 26 billion, which is about a 4%, 3 to 4% saving in terms of fleet's operating costs.
Massive. Rip, you spoke with Mike Roth, who's doing some interesting things as well, and we have a clip. Why don't you set that up for us? He talked a bit about fuel.
Mike comes to us from the North American Council on Freight Efficiency. He's got a wide range of knowledge about how fleets can capitalize not on the lower fuel prices, but on the steps that will help them whenever fuel prices go up again. Mike, thanks again for joining us. We really do appreciate your taking the time. What I'd like to do today first is to find out a little bit more about what your organization does and what you try to do to help trucking, very briefly.
Yeah, very good. I lead the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. It's a nonprofit startup. We're unbiased, but we're comprehensive about how we look at technologies, and our whole goal is to accelerate the adoption of things like low rolling resistance tires, aerodynamics, powertrain technologies to get better fuel economy and save money for the fleets. We do not get into recommending individual manufacturers of the technologies, but we definitely do on the technologies. We use a matrix that says, to what level do we think there's a payback on this technology, short or later, shorter the better from a financial standpoint, and then we show to what level of information, how much information is available for the fleet to make that decision. So if it's a newer technology, there may not be that much information. But what we find often in our work is that we conclude it has a quick payback, and there's a lot of data and a lot of information about it. Those are the ones that we would recommend and say, fleets, you should buy this or at least be testing it and looking at it because it has a payback. We go interview all the stakeholders around these technologies. So we talk with fleets, we talk with owner-operators, we talk with small and medium-sized fleets. So that's like the end users. We talk with shippers, we talk with the truck and trailer manufacturers, component manufacturers, and then even other people like EPA SmartWay, other folks that are interested in trucking, dealers. And we try to get that total perspective. So what you see from us and what we work hard to do is to get all that perspective and bring that into aggregation. 2016 will be the year where we solidify the second phase of greenhouse gas regulations for commercial trucks. And the proposed rulemaking came last summer, comment period has been this fall, and now the agencies will figure out what that will be. And that will be important because that will set in place a stringency of new truck and trailer production. Phase 2, I think what we're seeing is then, that expectation of increasing fuel economy over, steps in the regulation between now and 2027 that in reality will make a difference. The greenhouse gas regulations are going to happen.
Okay.
And we need to figure that out together. It will have benefits in fuel savings and total cost of ownership savings if we do it right.
Okay.
And so I think attention to that's important going into 2016, 17, and beyond.
Eugene, one of the things that Mike Roth mentioned was the greenhouse gas proposal, laying out suggested standards. Remind us of what happened with that.
Here again, we have, that 2015, which was such a busy year for transportation. And this was a joint proposal by EPA and NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And it basically is meant to tighten the emissions of carbon dioxide through 2027. And it would include different standards for engines, trailers, and vehicles. And this is in the final rule on GHG, this phase 2 is EPA has indicated will come out in the summer of 2016, so summer next year. In the administration, the Obama administration has been very aggressive in addressing man-made climate change, so this falls under that umbrella effort.
Okay. Sean, does the Federation like this? Is this a
well, we certainly
yay or nay?
We are certainly very supportive of Phase 1. Phase 2, we'll have to see in the final, how it's finally hashed out. Early indications that the industry will be supportive of the goals at least. Some significant changes in Phase 2 from Phase 1 is the splitting of engines from tractors. In phase one, it was the whole truck. This is now we're taking each part separately, including trailers for the first time. So and that is actually the very first, at least in the proposal, would be the first target would be 2017 model year tractors, or excuse me, trailers.
Yes.
So it'll be, it's certainly something that's going to be chief on our watch list for 2016. And I'm sure we'll get into this later, particularly with what we expect will be a relatively quiet year on Capitol Hill, given electoral politics.
Oh, yeah.
The regulatory front is going to be very significant for ATA and for the industry.
Okay. Well, you brought it up, but about the regulation and more things to happen next year up there. So here's another one for the both of you, Eugene, and for Sean on the regulatory front. And it involves, we talked about it a little bit ago with the Omnibus, but if we could shed a little more light on it, where the government and industry stand with the use of 33s and the hours of service provision. Sean, you can go first and just tell us a little bit more. What's the industry's stance on both of these, hours of service and twins?
Sure. On hours of service, we're very pleased that the Omnibus will be, in essence, lengthening the suspension of the restart restrictions. The restrictions we're talking about requiring drivers to have 2 consecutive overnights, 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., and using it once every 168 hours or once a week.
The 34-hour restart, right?
The 34-hour restart. We believed at the time when the rule was being proposed, and then we saw that borne out by ATRI data, that this was going to increase daytime driving time. It's going to raise crash risk. There was a provision in last year's Omnibus to suspend those restrictions pending study. This language essentially, adds more boxes to check in that study, and we believe that the agency will not be able to show conclusively that this rule improves safety, driver health and wellness, driver longevity, impacts on driver schedules. There's a number of things that they'll have to look at. So we're very happy that language is in the Omnibus. On 33s, we're obviously disappointed it didn't carry. It had bipartisan support on both sides of Capitol Hill. In a small vocal minority opposed it, and it ultimately didn't get through. But we'll have to see what 2016 brings in terms of other potential opportunities.
And
Anything else?
there were not a lot of industries that got what they wanted in the Omnibus. So a different perspective. 1 out of 2 is not that bad. And to take a step back on the hours of service suspension, in recent conversations I've had with FMCSA, they've indicated that the current review of the hours of service restart rule will be finalized and presented to Congress in February. So obviously, whatever these new enhancements in the Omnibus on the study will, as Sean said, continue that suspension of the restart rule. To take even a further step back, it was surprising to see that before the vote on approving the suspension of the hours of service restart on Capitol Hill in 2014, we saw senators take to the floor in support of the concerns the industry had raised on hours of service. So it was a bipartisan call. You had senior Democrats and senior Republicans, saying that in fact this rule was forcing some drivers to operate in the busy morning hours. So that really had carried a lot of weight. And when we saw in that year's omnibus, which was actually referred as a cromnibus because it was an omnibus and a continuing resolution.
Okay.
Exactly. That was the fiscal 2015 funding law, and that's where that suspension was initiated. And again, on Twin 33s, there was some anticipation earlier in the year that they were going to authorize them nationwide, getting out of the House appropriation season in the spring. I came away thinking that there was a lot of momentum on Twin 33s on Capitol Hill, but again, if you strategize the Capitol Hill landscape, I really also have to think that there were some key senators and some key positions that were not supportive of this. So, Senator Roger Wicker's colleague in the Senate from the same home state, Thad Cochran, he's also the chairman of this funding panel. So, being in such a senior leadership role, and you had senior Democrats led by California's Dianne Feinstein, who has a lot of cachet in the intelligence circles on Capitol Hill. All that politics, I think, contributed to Twin 33's not ultimately being in the Omnibus.
Yeah. Eugene, let me just jump in for 1 second. A moment or two ago, you said 1 out of 2 is not bad. Well, it wasn't exactly 1 out of 2 because the first positive affects the entire industry. It's good for the entire $700 billion industry. And the Twin 33s, while it would provide benefits for some companies, wouldn't necessarily have provided benefits for others right away.
Yeah, no, correct. And that's a great point, Rip. And I didn't mean to. What I meant was 1 out of 2 for the supporters of the backers of that provision and the Omnibus.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just jump in to remind our viewers that this is Live on Web, and we're doing recapping our year and taking a look at next year. And I'm joined by Transport Topics reporters Rip Watson and Eugene Malero, and also ATA spokesman Sean McNally. You can join the conversation as well just by sending us an email or a comment to share@ttnews.com, or you can comment directly on this article page. Rip, also this year, big news had to do with mergers and acquisitions, takeovers, expansions, name it. Just maybe all of that savings and fuel that you talked about went to some of that. Tell us what stood out and why among some of the big deals we saw this year.
Let's go back to the fuel and some of those benefits in a minute. Big picture. The largest company on Transport Topics Top 100, UPS. Bought Coyote Logistics, an industry-leading company which filled a hole in their service offerings for domestic freight brokerage. FedEx, number 2, decided that they wanted to buy TNT, a Dutch-based company, which is very strong in Europe and in Asia, to broaden FedEx's worldwide service offerings. Then there was this company called XPO Logistics, which a few years ago, when Brad Jacobs came into trucking and said, I'm going to make a splash in this industry, some people doubted that. Now that he's got a $19 billion company, which would become number 3 on the top 100, people are definitely listening. He bought Conway, very well-known company with 86 years, almost 90 years of history. He bought Norbert Dentressangle, a French trucking and logistics company. He bought some smaller trucking companies, and now he's in a very strong position. At the same time, there were companies like Echo Global Logistics and others that also made acquisitions to make themselves bigger. Bottom line, though, let's remember, all these acquisitions didn't change the picture in the fact that the truckload industry is still very fragmented. The brokerage industry is still very fragmented, even though C.H. Robinson is by far the largest. And the less than truckload industry has a handful of major players, but it isn't as if Conway was purchased at the same time that one of its competitors was purchased.
Okay. Well, with companies so flush, tell me, what does that mean for driver pay, for the driver shortage? How far does this go? If you're consolidating, what does this mean?
Well, there's no question companies are doing very well in terms of they're collecting higher rates and they're paying less for fuel. Those are 2 very big positives. What that means for rates going forward, the consensus is that freight rates are going to go down in terms of the pace of their increase. Just to, I'll
Oh, okay.
restate that.
Slower
so
gain.
it's clear, slower increases in large part because there's a feeling that there's enough freight capacity out there right now. And what drove up the rates last year to almost unprecedented levels was the fact there wasn't enough capacity, and the shippers and brokers just had to pay more to get what they wanted. Now, as far as driver pay, look at last year in the third quarter when rates were very strong and the driver shortage was in a difficult situation in part because of hours of service restrictions. Almost 50% of fleets raised driver pay in the third quarter of last year, led by one company, U.S. Express, that kicked it off. But what's happened since then is that whole pace of driver pay increases has scaled back, and because fleets have already kind of splurged, if you will, in trying to make their drivers happy. What's happening instead is there's a lot more attention being paid to driver retention, and there's less attention being paid to things that raise driver pay and try to force people to move by offering sign-on bonuses.
I see. Okay. Sean, from the industry's perspective, what do you all see? Bigger companies need bigger drivers. So aside from pay, what are some of the other efforts that are being pushed to combat the driver shortage?
Right. I mean, the driver shortage is still a huge concern for, even though it's, numerically, there's 3.4 million truck drivers in the shortage by the end of the year. We estimate it's about 48,000. So, scale-wise, it's, the numbers are important. We need to also remember that it's not necessarily a quantity issue, it's a quality issue. Earlier this year, Bob Costello produced our semi-regular update on the shortage and found that 88% of fleets reported that most of the candidates they get are not qualified. So we're looking at the qualification side, whether it's entry-level driver training, which there'll be a final rule later on this year, in 2016, that we're running out of a year for later on.
Right.
Which is a negotiated rulemaking, and we can maybe touch on that, some of the details there later. But also looking at veterans, the Hiring Our Heroes program, we're about a year into our 2-year commitment at ATA to hire 100,000 veterans. There were some provisions in FAST Act, which made it a little bit easier for veterans to transition into careers driving with some of the licensing requirements in terms of converting a military CDL to a civilian CDL. Some of the experiential requirements can be waived. But the bottom line is our industry needs to hire about 89,000 people to drive truck a year just to keep pace with retirements and industry growth.
Okay.
So those 89,000 have to come from somewhere, and we're,
So there's really no real contraction just because we're seeing some consolidation.
Right.
We need a whole lot more drivers.
The freight still needs to be moved. Rip's made several references to it, but trucks move about 70% of the nation's domestic freight tonnage. So that's not going to change. We still need trucks, we still need drivers, no matter how large or small the companies are.
Absolutely. It's just that we might be in a bit of a breathing spell here, before the driver shortage becomes much more difficult to deal with for fleets and for their customers.
Now, Rip, what about on the multimodal front as well? What's happening there?
Two things that are really important. One is, in spite of the fact that there's not as much tonnage growth this year, there's still strong interest in intermodal freight, and nearly half of the freight that moves by rail now is truck freight at the beginning and the end of the move. That's something that's never happened before. For a few months this year, there was actually more truck freight than there was everything else moving by rail. So that's an important trend that I think both trucking and railroads have shown a lot of interest in expanding. And ultimately, it may be a positive from the truckers' perspective for this reason. Occasionally in the past, there have been political headbutting between truckers and railroads about what the regulatory regime should be or what the legal regime should be. You would think that as more freight goes on trains, that we would think that that would give the truckers a little more leverage. Speaking of trains, there is currently a fight going on. In fact, once it escalated slightly today. Canadian Pacific Railroad, that's based in Canada, but has had tremendous success reducing its operating ratio 22 percentage points over 3 years, is now going after Norfolk Southern, a U.S. company whose operating ratio and business have been kind of languishing. We don't know how this is going to come out, but Canadian Pacific has once again enhanced its offer today, and they have made it clear that if Norfolk Southern doesn't come to the table, there will be a proxy fight next year. And by proxy fight, I mean either they will go to the Norfolk Southern shareholders and say, we'd like you to pass a resolution telling your directors to sit down and talk with Canadian Pacific, or the alternative would be to post their own slate of directors to run at the Norfolk Southern General Meeting. Let me finish for 2 seconds. Only this. Canadian Pacific, it was transformed in 2012 after an investor named Bill Ackman from Pershing Square Capital successfully led an ousting of the Canadian Pacific directors and installed his guy named Hunter Harrison to run the railroad, and we've seen what happens.
Well, it's a $28 billion deal. What is Norfolk Southern holding out for? Is it more money, or they just don't want to be absorbed? Do we have a clue?
Well, Norfolk Southern is very adamant that they think that this is not going to go anywhere at the Surface Transportation Board, the rail regulatory agency, that there's no precedent for it, that the proposed structure that Canadian Pacific has put out there is illegal and doesn't work. Of course, on the other hand, Canadian Pacific claimed today that every single time the structure they've proposed has been considered by the STB, it's been approved. So there is a much larger issue, probably for another LiveOnWeb, about why Norfolk Southern doesn't like this. You could say that they're certainly don't want to give up the position that they're in, all the positions that they're in. You could also say that the railroad industry in general doesn't like Canadian Pacific coming in, because Canadian Pacific is proposing to make some changes in rail access for that could theoretically reduce the revenue for the freight railroads.
I see. Okay.
In the U.S.
So all right. So we got a lot of things that are going on in there.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's a big wait and see. So 2016 ought to be as inviting about that. Let's talk about technology. The innovation has been everywhere in every industry. No need to think it did not permeate trucking as well. And some really cool things were going on with the truck, the trailer, and the gadgets that are in both. Perhaps the most buzz was about autonomous vehicles and platooning, things like that. And that's something that, again, you and Mike Roth had a chance to chat about. Why don't you tell us about it?
Without further ado, let's go right to what Mike has to say. He's got plenty on his mind.
I think driverless vehicles is something that can happen in 20, 30 years.
Good or bad?
Good.
Good if some have them and some don't?
I think they can mix together. I think over that 20 or 30 years, we're going to see that. I think there's a whole bunch of incremental steps to there.
Okay. Driverless trucks in particular. Good, bad, indifferent?
Sure. I mean, I'm an engineer, and I look at the technologies that are being delivered, and we can do that. You know, we can stay away from things. We can manage the long, lonely highways without drivers in the trucks. Now, I'm not naive in saying that this is going to happen tomorrow, but I think if we're thinking 20, 30 years down the road, and our ability to, think of a small, we've done so much work on efficiency. We could use a 100 horsepower engine can haul some of these trailers across the country. So maybe it's a little engine buried in a trailer, and there's no tractor at all.
Okay.
Actually, why autonomous trucks are coming out, Let's don't worry about putting lines in the road. Let's let the truck see the road that already exists and operate within it.
All right. So, Rip, tell us how are fleets absorbing some of these changes that are coming at a very rapid pace?
I would say that if we're talking about things like autonomous trucks and we're talking about platooning, those things aren't happening yet, so they're not really absorbing anything. But it's really important to note that fleets have taken advantage of all kinds of important advancements in the way that they do their business. Whether it's TMS systems, whether it's more in-cab technology. There's certainly been no shortage of fleets' willingness to move forward with technology that's proven its worth, such as TMS systems or such as things like wide-base tires.
Gotcha. But in terms of the vehicle, that's still just so concept at the moment that what you do is watch it and be in awe.
Absolutely.
All right, Eugene. Legislators, are they grappling with any of this in any way? We saw what happened with ELDs, but any other tech things as it relates to trucking? Anything else going on there?
Yeah, the transportation panels have, over the years, looked at advanced technologies, especially any system that can improve safety, not only on highways, but also in intermodals. And, an example I can think of is, the Commerce Committee in the Senate, they've held a series of hearings, the most recent one in the spring, in which they did look at, the benefits of intelligent technology, autonomous vehicles, and there's an expectation, not by next year, but there's the likelihood that in the new Congress, now I'm skipping 2 years down the road, there's going to be legislation that may be a head-on look at regulation, proposing regulations for autonomous vehicles, but that's still, in the future, and there's a lot of maybes in that. In the 2015 FAST Act just signed into law, there are provisions in there that would call for studies on vehicle-to-vehicle technology. So industry, I know, is looking to see what comes out of those studies.
Okay, so a lot of things to come. Sean, Eugene just took us 2 years into the crystal ball, so let's come. We can come back a little bit though, and just go to 2016. What would the industry like to see? What do lawmakers or regulators already have on deck for 2016? What's hanging out there?
I'm actually going to start by taking us a little bit to the past. This October at our MC&E, on the subject of technology and trucking being interested in various types of safety technology.
You just removed the crystal ball, but go ahead.
Well, just push it to the side for a minute. ATA, our board called upon truck manufacturers to make automatic emergency braking standard. This follows a NHTSA IIHS press event earlier in the fall, where the 10 automakers agreed that this was something they would be doing in the near future. We sort of followed on that, sort of before regulation gets promulgated on the technology. So now pushing the crystal ball back, bringing it back on the table. We believe 2016 will be the year that we finally see a final rule on speed limiters. ATA had petitioned for this in 2006, so maybe a decade is just long enough to get this rule done. It comes on as part of ATA's package of various safety initiatives that we support, center around speed. and speed limits. And speed is a very important safety, aspect of safety. About a third of all fatal crashes involve excess speed. Speed is the #1 associated factor with fatal crashes. So we believe if we can slow down trucks and cars, we've noticed a disturbing trend of states raising their speed limits as 75, 80, 85 in some states. Thank you, Texas, which is just too fast for safety. So we're hopeful that we'll see a final rule there. Additional final rules, we talked about entry-level driver training.
Right.
This will most likely be it's a negotiated rulemaking. They brought all the stakeholders together in a room, talked about it, and so that hopefully will make for an easy transition to a final rule. It'll be an hours-based standard. We had been pushing for a performance-based as opposed to just simply punching a clock. We'll see how that works out.
And is that something they've been working on since the 80s?
It's been a long time coming. The gears of government grind slowly.
Since the movie Back to the Future came out.
Yes. Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. We talked about hair testing. Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse was something that was called for by MAP 21. So we'll finally see that come out. We're very supportive of that in concept. There are some landmines in the proposed rule that we hope get ironed out in the final, specifically that the clearinghouse would only house data on testing. It would not house information on either observation, if your supervisor sees you using drugs or alcohol behind the wheel, or if you self-report, if you say, I got a problem. We believe those probably should be in the clearinghouse as part of the full information that is provided, because they would count as violations under current law. And
those. What about carrier safety fitness determination? Is that one you're looking
it cleared
for?
OMB, but it will be interesting to see what that looks like, because there are some connections to the CSA scores where the CSA scores cannot be used in FAST.
Yeah.
The CSA scores cannot be used as part of that safety fitness determination process. So we'll be curious to see how that resolves itself.
like.
And that would be a proposed rule as opposed to a final rule. So that's still several years out. Would presumably be several years out in implementation.
Well, Eugene, then perhaps the biggest one still seems like it would be the Senate confirmation of Scott Darling, the acting administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which is tasked with overseeing everything that Sean just talked about. So what do we know, if anything? Are they closer to this? The year is on its way out. Any likelihood it will happen? Or is this firmly into next year? Or is this never? Do we know?
We've gotten indication from the Senate panel that they want to move forward on. The Senate Commerce Committee wants to have a hearing with Scott Darling to examine his qualifications. We know that the acting administrator has submitted the questionnaire before the committee. We've written about it. There's no real red flags. He was nominated by the president over the summer to lead FMCSA. Right now, because the end of the year and Congress is expected to adjourn this Friday, the Senate committee is going to take it up early next year. And he would be the last of the major sub-agencies the last nominee for the major sub-agencies at DOT to get a hearing before the panel. The expectation is that if Senate Commerce approves him, he will very likely be confirmed by the Senate. So that's Scott Darling. And also on some other issues in 2016, Lori, it's obviously a presidential year, so not a lot on the legislative front, and we got the highway law this month, but in 2016 we're going to see the implementation of the provisions, the beginning of the FAST Act. And the one thing that to track, not only see how the reforms to CSA are going, but also the hair testing provision in the FAST Act. The Health and Human Services Department has a year to set standards for hair testing. They have to give that to DOT for DOT to give it its green light. So that will happen December 2016. Right. And then also, and Sean can correct me if I'm wrong, but sometime in the spring we're going to see an advance notice of proposed rule on sleep apnea. That's that's going to go, take a step further, and it's going to be posted in the Federal Register.
But again, something that was already underway. So
Yeah.
nothing new, doesn't seem as if there'll be much that's new, a lot of implementing what's already been talked about, hopefully. Rip, on the business front, any other key factors in 2016 we can
Let me make
should
let
look
me
forward
try
to?
let me try to make a transition here. 2016 looks to me like it's going to be a year of digestion of all of these changes after the trucking industry dealt with an awful lot of indigestion in recent years.
What a phrase.
So if you're a fleet and you're in you'd have to think Congress is going to be looking elsewhere, as Sean and Eugene have noted. So this would suggest that the door is open for this to be a year of kind of continuing the direction that we've gone. Modest freight growth, driven by modest GDP growth, equipment purchases that were really strong, but slowed down late in the year, maybe the pace slowing down a little bit more. What does that mean for drivers? Probably drivers are going to continue to get a little more money. Fuel, who knows? That gives lots of people indigestion. I don't even want to get anywhere close to that. In terms of access to capital, maybe if interest rates go up a bit, which they're seeming to do,
Right.
then maybe that's going to put the pressure on some of the more marginal fleets. Over the long term,
To put the pressure on them to slow capital expenditures,
put the pressure on some of the more marginal fleets who may not have the money to be able
continue.
to stay in, not necessarily not stay in business, but not be able to reinvest in their fleets. Last but not least, we've been in a market with a modest driver shortage and modest growth and a modest economy overall behind it. You'd think that this year coming up would be one when there would not be huge changes in what happens in the trucking industry's broad direction. And I'm going to wrap up my thoughts only by saying that if there is some world-shaking issue, such as security, that resounds throughout the industry and throughout the U.S. in general, that's likely to perhaps make a change in this. All you need to do is look at what happened to the U.S. economy after 9/11.
Right. Okay. Let's take a few more questions that have come in. Sean, one for you. This is from Rebecca Sandy, owner of Sandpen Logistics. And she says, what is ATA supporting for a replacement to CSA scores?
Sure. Excuse me. I don't think we're looking for a replacement for CSA. I think what we're looking for is improvements to the current system. ATA's position has been pretty clear from the beginning that we support the goals and aims of CSA, which, at its heart, CSA is a system for law enforcement to target bad actors in our industry.
Okay.
Those who have, safety records that are poor. So we're looking for improvements to that system so that the system can accurately point out the carriers that are unsafe. So we'll be looking to see how the CSA reforms from FAST Act are implemented. One that we haven't spoken about, but is very important, is the how CSA will ultimately deal with non-preventable, not at fault crashes. Currently, those crashes are
Tell us what those are, non-preventable, not at fault. Somebody's run into the truck.
Somebody runs into a truck where the truck has no reasonable expectation of avoiding the crash. Good examples, or not good examples, but examples are a drunk driver crosses the center line and hits a truck head on. Speeding car hits the back of a truck. Those sorts of things where the truck driver could not have reasonably prevented the crash. Those crashes are currently built into the system. They are, it counts as a crash against your crash indicator. It flags you potentially for future enforcement, even though your truck and driver had no real expectation that they would be able to avoid that. The Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee now has a year, I think, to come back to FMCSA with recommendations on how those crashes are to be dealt with, how they're to be identified, police records, things of that nature. And then the agency has to say how they're going to adopt the recommendations of the Mix Act. So we're hopeful that that will ultimately the ultimate resolution will be those crashes don't get counted against the trucking companies the way that they're not counted against individual drivers by their insurance companies. If you're not at fault, you're not responsible, you're not liable, and that principle should carry through into CSA.
Rip, we have one from Jane Sandifer, Vice President of Business Solutions at Advanced Shipping Technologies. And she wants to know, what do you see in store for 3PLs? Will the market continue to collapse with buyouts and consolidations as we're seeing in 2015? Are specialized 3PLs having greater success?
Jane, thanks for that question. I love it. And partly because it gives me a chance to go back to revise a little bit of what I said earlier about consolidations and consolidating. We got to remember that in the third-party logistics world, there has been a lot of consolidation with purchases by companies such as UPS, as I mentioned earlier. But this industry is still not really fully consolidated, and it's a long way from being there. I think what many people might think is coming up in 16 for the 3PLs is continuation of the things that they've done very well, which is they've come in and they've shown over the years that they do a terrific job of being able to provide value for a shipper and provide value for smaller fleets that don't have their own marketing departments. So again, it would seem logical to expect more of the same.
Okay. Eugene, one we have also from Larry Walker. He's an office manager at Alabama Carriers, Inc., and he wants to know what effect, if any, will the pending 2016 election have on the trucking industry? And you started to touch on that a little bit ago.
Well, if we're talking about the election overall, not only the run for the White House, but also Congress, if we talk about Congress, if there is a shift in leadership, especially in the Senate, so if the Senate is currently run by the Republicans, if it turns for the Democrats, then you can see Democratic efforts and their priorities. So now you have lawmakers who have views on size and weight and have views on the Twin 33s and that have certain oppositions to FMCSA's HOS, to reinstating the suspension of the HOS. Now they're in a position of leadership, so there you will see a significant change. There's no expectation really that the House is going to, the GOP majority is so strong on the House side that the House is going to flip. If anything, there's expectation that it's not going to flip for several Congresses. And then for the White House, to take a step back, there's actually 3 candidates that have presented transportation plans and infrastructures, and that's Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady. She has presented a business reform package to pay for infrastructure programs. The independent from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, has a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, but no way to pay for it. And Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky on the Republican side, has a infrastructure bank that he has proposed with Democrat Barbara Boxer, but that infrastructure proposal in the Senate hasn't picked up any steam.
All right, and just want to add there that Hillary Clinton is also a former senator from New York and former Secretary of State.
Of course.
Sean, one for you from Dawn Dredgier. I hope I did you right there, Dawn. She's the president of SAP Referral Services. And her question is, has there been any movement on the development of a centralized reporting system for the drug and alcohol test results?
Right, and we spoke about that before. We're hoping that the clearinghouse rule will be finalized and published in 2016. Again, it's an important rule for trucking because we want to make sure that we're hiring the safest, most qualified drivers. We talked a little bit about the quality issue and with respect to the driver shortage. And this is a big loophole. There were congressional hearings. There were many, a lot of debate and discussion about this loophole of job hopping, where a driver could be terminated from company A for a positive drug test and then simply move to another state or wait out a little bit and get hired at another company. That second company not having any knowledge of his prior offense. So we're hoping that the clearinghouse rule will be out soon, and sometime early in 2016, and then that loophole will get closed.
All right. Rip, I think this is our final question for today. It's from Brian Day, Business Development Manager at Driving Ambition, Inc. What do you expect to see in 2016 along the way of trends for driver pay, driver benefits, or even driver qualifications, such as insurance requirements or experience and age, to continue to help offset the continuing driver shortage? Sean, you feel free to weigh in after Rick as well.
Last question.
Well, good. Frankly, I think we talked about this a little bit, which is that we could probably expect modest growth in the economy, helps trucking modestly, and helps to push driver pay up modestly. The bigger thing here that we need, we're thinking more in the larger scheme about the driver shortage. One of the things that strikes, I think, anyone who listens to what Sean and Eugene have said is these changes that are being put in place by the government and by companies that are in business and are trying to find a way to thrive. These changes are making the job of being a truck driver, who represents the large majority of the number of people in the industry, that much more difficult to do. And in response to that, the obvious easy thing to say is that what's going to happen here is that the companies who are in the business are going to have to find new and different ways to satisfy their most important asset. And I don't like to think of a person as an asset like a new truck, but there's a complete perfect connection that you'll see if you, without naming the fleet, you can look out on the highway, and this is one of the large ones, and there's a big arrow on the side of their trailers that says the most important people in our business is right here, and that's kind of where we are.
Yep, they got to move the freight. Sean?
I mean, I would agree with
Anything
that. The most important piece of safety technology or safety equipment in a truck is the driver. All these things, whether it's electronic logging or automatic emergency braking, all of those are only assistants to the driver. Drivers. I'll get some eye rolls here, but drivers really do move America forward.
Eye roll.
Yeah. So
Not
I
for
mean,
me.
and we're proud of our drivers. They really do an excellent job for this industry, and we appreciate what they do. And I think we're going to see more tangible signs of that appreciation in the future.
All right. Well, thank each of you. We'll have to leave it there for now. A replay of today's program, as well as our full interview with Mike Roth of the North American Trucking Council for Freight Efficiency, will be available later today at ttnews.com. LiveOnWeb is also available in podcast form. Go to iTunes, search LiveOnWeb, and subscribe. We'd like to know what you think of our show. Send us feedback. by going to liveonweb.ttnews.com/subscribe. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's show, Select Trucks, as well as my colleagues, Senior Business Reporter Rip Watson, Congressional Reporter Eugene Mulero, ATA Spokesman Sean McNally, and our production team, Joseph Terry, Kevin Eaton, Tara McClellan, Shihab Mustafa, and digital media editor Gary Kosinski. And of course, thank you for watching and for participating. I'm Lori Grant. From all of us at Transport Topics to all of you, happy holidays.